Hello everyone, welcome to Internally Screening. Today we're doing another Hooptober review, and this time we're covering 1997's Event Horizon, directed not by Paul Thomas Anderson, not by Wes Anderson, but Paul W.S. Anderson, the one and only. He's a bit of a Marmite director, and Event Horizon is probably his most universally appreciated films, I'll say that much. He's obviously famous for the Resident Evil series of late, and other sort of schlocky Hollywood, I'm going to be real, garbage like Pompeii and
Alien vs.
Predator. I'm not a very big fan of Paul W.S. Anderson, which we'll get into, but Event Horizon is kind of an interesting film because it's a straight up horror, sci-fi horror, and it's like a very popular kind of horror in that it's sort of a contained environment, alien-ish, Lovecraftian horror film, which you don't really get much of. Because I feel like Lovecraftian horror is just particularly hard to do on film by nature of an unknowable horror being difficult to capture on film.
Right. Yeah.
But this is obviously, this film, it stars a lot of people, but primarily Sam Neill and Laurence Fishburne. They go out on a spaceship. They're looking for an old spaceship. They find it. Something's gone horribly wrong. They were trying to make the power of a black hole to generate energy or something. Demons and such occur, and you have yourself a horror film. Adam, what do you think of Event Horizon?
Well, Event Horizon is a strange film for me because it is a film that is just chock full of flaws, poor decisions, sloppy editing, bizarre behind the scenes decision making with
bad
regards poor performances even from beloved actors. I absolutely adore Laurence Fishburne and Sam Neill. I mean, even if for only a handful of roles. I mean, Sam Neill, the more I see him in, the more I love him. Absolute goat. But obviously childhood because of Jurassic Park, and similarly Laurence Fishburne, super charismatic, but The Matrix just cemented that for me as a youngster.
And Hannibal gave him his horror chops on a high level.
True.
Because he's incredible in that.
I mean, basically two actors that, while not at the peak of like the Hollywood A-list, every time they're in something, they are fantastic.
Yeah.
By and large. In this, Sam Neill is either really subdued or super evil. In fact, you know what? That's a lie. He's super evil from the get-go. He pretends.
Spoilers.
Spoilers. Sorry, lads. He's like barely containing his.
It's very obvious very soon.
Palpable sexual energy towards this black hole and the entities that lie beyond. And Laurence Fishburne has clearly been told to act like a plank of wood because
they put him on like 10 Valiums a day and they'll act.
You know what it reminds me of? Actually, I shouldn't make this comparison because it reminds me of Samuel Jackson. But it's a legit comparison.
No, he's the opposite. He's like, Samuel L. Jackson is someone who just oozes charisma.
No,
you just can't take it off.
But this is my point, is that this is like when Samuel L. Jackson was in the prequel. Because it's a super charismatic actor. And this isn't the comparison you think I'm making. Okay, this is just legit two very charismatic actors who normally are just fantastic to watch, like an absolute treat to watch. And God knows why, but put him perhaps in front of directors that just have no idea how to properly utilize the acting talent in front of them. Just have the most like dead-eyed performances you could possibly get out of.
Well, I mean, if you've seen a Paul W.S. Anderson film, I mean, that acting is just never that good in these films. Like, take for example, Pompeii has Kit Harington in it. Like, we know Kit Harington is a good actor,
yes,
right? And he's not good at it,
right? Yeah,
he just comes across as very bland. And look, I don't know the full story. Maybe he is really good with actors, and I'm missing something because Paul W.S. Anderson has sort of undergone this cult reevaluation because he was long agreed by many sort of film people to not be a very good director, and he's kind of been reevaluated, which I think is interesting and has value, but I just don't know how you can reevaluate him after you've seen his films. Event Horizon is sort of considered by most people to be his best film, and I'm not going to say it doesn't have anything to offer whatsoever, but I have to say, if this is his best film, we're in dire straits, because this is still quite a bad film.
I can understand why, of all of his films, if there was one you were to latch onto and say this is a sort of diamond in the rough, where there's such a unique atmosphere to this film, which I really love, and I can really see the potential within it, where sure, it borrows heavily from Alien, as basically all sci-fi horror does and has done since that film came out. It's basically an impossible thing to avoid. But in introducing the Lovecraftian angle, it generates this sort of really unsettling atmosphere, really like true to the Lovecraftian fashion, a genuinely sort of unkind of speakable horror. It's hard to articulate. But the problem there is that Paul W.S. Anderson almost insists on introducing kind of goofy elements in that. There's a lot of really mindless jump scares. There's some comic relief characters that completely detract any level of tension from the scenes that they're in, and sort of cutbacks to them just make for a really jarring tonal mess. We have the bad performances, as I've said. I mean, I don't hate Sam Neill's performance because it at least has a sort of over-the-top cheesiness that kind of almost fits with what's going on. But again,
it's what gets the most screen time, and he gets the most character detail of everyone.
He does. But again, there is a kind of level to which that cheesiness spills over and muddies the tone of it. I kind of like his kind of super villain-esque sort of Joker chortling of like, you don't understand society of the black hole or whatever.
Wait, why does he sound like Jeff Goldblum?
Yeah.
You're just obsessed with Jurassic Park.
It's supposed to be, Batman. But no, instead it became, When will we get the Jeff Goldblum Joker
Demons,
that we deserve?
Find a way.
So, with all those things considered, in spite of all of the benefits that the film has in that atmosphere, it ends up as just quite a sort of messy amalgamation of elements that don't really mesh well together, and there's so many missed opportunities. If you took some of those elements out, if you sorted the tone out and you, gave more mind to the nature of the scares and put more kind of creativity into those horrifying moments. I guess another thing is that aesthetically, I think this film is excellent. Outside of the awful CGI, which must have looked terrible at the time with like the floating water pockets. Outside of that, when you're actually in the spaceship, there's like a really
I like the design of the giant cube.
There's the sphere.
The sphere, whatever it is.
It's completely opposite to
I'm thinking of Hellraiser because this film just reminds me so much of Hellraiser.
Well, yes. You've got all the cool sort of demonic visions and flashes, and that's all very stylish, but the design of the spaceship itself, it definitely harkens to Alien, but it has a kind of slightly different quality to it. I love the room they first enter into is this big cavernous hallway, and it's kind of almost looks like some kind of gigantic like rib cage, or like you're in the inside of the mouth of a huge whale or something. But yeah, ultimately it just, for me, it fails to unite any of those interesting elements in a cohesive way, and all the jarring, shitty qualities to it completely ruin the tone, and it ends super abruptly, and it leaves a really sour taste in the mouth.
Yeah, I mean, this film I think is just kind of vibes only, because there is a kind of interesting concept here, and I guess a lot of people also latch onto this film because there's this kind of like lost film quality to it, because there was this whole like blood orgy mystery scene that was shot for the film. The film was apparently like a lot longer. Paul W.S. Anderson he had to cut loads of stuff out because apparently they got like really bad audience reception at the time, and there's kind of this feeling with this film where it's like, oh, what if? It's intriguing, but in a way I think almost the mystery of what was left out of the film is kind of like just a very thematically fitting like within the film itself, because the film is kind of like, they're arriving like, what happened to all these people? Basically what happens is they got sucked into this like hell dimension. It's basically like Slanesh from the Warhammer or whatever, like, they get sucked in, they do this depraved shit, or like, it's like Hellraiser, because really this film is Hellraiser in space. And I honestly don't think that the cut out footage would have done a whole lot, because the quality of the film throughout is just really not great. You have Laurence Fishburne just being like so blank, like he's just so blank the whole film, and he's kind of like your main character for much of the film, because Sam Neill obviously takes this like turn, and he is so boring in this film, like it's actually painful. And the film kind of climaxes with him and Sam Neill having this like ridiculous hand-to-hand combat scene,
right? Yeah.
Where they're like flying around and punching each other. Like every character is weak. Like you've got like B-Tech Laura Dern, who's just kind of nothing. She just really offers nothing. You've got the black guy who ends up in space and has a hilarious bit where he's like, "I'm coming, motherfucker."
Yeah,
it's like laughably terrible.
Well, that's the thing. I can't really, outside of Laurence Fishburne, Sam Neill, and the funny black guy, I can't really remember any of the other characters.
There's the older lady who like falls down the vent.
Oh, true. Yes.
Which I only remember because she falls down the vent.
Well, she sees spooky her like dead son, because they're all seeing visions of people that passed or stuff like that, stuff that will sort of like directly trigger them. I
feel like this film would have been much better if it was longer, because what it needed was time to breathe, where you could sit down with the characters, kind of learn about them like you do in Alien, for example. And if it's going to be a vibes film, because it's not a plot film, it's not an acting film, and it's not an effects film, So it has to be a vibes film, and that can be enough sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think about It Comes at Night. That is a film that has not a whole lot of plot, but it's very vibes. It's really fucked up and spooky because barely anything happens in that film, but it's still really tense and scary. And this film is trying to rattle through its own like sort of rickety plot at such a sort of economic pace that you never really get a chance to sit and experience the atmosphere of the film.
Yeah.
So you just kind of have to go from one annoying bit to another annoying bit. Fake jump scare after fake jump scare, and it's like it's actually just this sort of whenever I watch it, I get what you mean about the atmosphere and some of the design of the film is really kind of like intriguing and captivating. But before long, and because I have seen this film multiple times, every time I watch it, I feel like, oh, I'm intrigued, and then quickly I just remember how just sort of slapdash of a standard horror film it actually is.
That's an interesting point, actually, because we saw this film a few years ago, and then we've recently rewatched it, and in that time between watches, I had kind of lured myself into that way of thinking that seems to be quite common with this film, like you say, of remembering all of the atmosphere, remembering all of the good bits.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start watching it, like you say, you encounter all of the fucking Deadwood performances and awful jump scares, terrible tonal shifts. It is deeply frustrating in that way.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with liking this film. I think there is something of quality here. I don't think it's very well directed, and I don't think it's very well acted. And like basically all the important things about a good film are just not here for me.
Yeah.
So what would you rate Event Horizon?
It's tricky. I feel like it sounded like I've been shitting on this the whole time, and I kind of have. But the atmosphere does go a long way in keeping me invested throughout. And even though the whole blood orgy section is largely omitted, that kind of climax of, well, just before the Sam Neill, Laurence Fishburne fight scene, where they're getting all the visions beamed into their heads and they're seeing all these flashes of this hellish world. I really like that as a moment of visceral horror. That's something the film has sort of drip fed us from the beginning when they find the first sort of tapes, the black box recordings of what happened to the previous crew. So I think, all things considered, I'd probably give it a 4 out of 10. I think that's somewhat generous, but there is a kind of mystique, an unknowable factor, an unplaceable factor to this film that does make me enjoy it more so than a lot of other films of its quality level. I can completely see, again, why this film, of all of his films, would have a cult following. Yeah, there is just a certain level of mystique to it that I find oddly alluring. What would you give it?
I mean, I understand, but for me, it's a 3 out of 10. I've now seen it. I think I've maybe even seen it 3 times.
Okay.
Separately, and it's not changing. It's not good. I don't know what to say. And I want to like it because I like being a bit of a contrarian. If I could be like, oh, Paul W.S. Anderson's actually a great director, I'd love to say that.
Yeah.
But I have to be honest with myself. If this is his best film, and I've seen a few of his films, this is just not a good film. And I don't think he's a good director. He's probably one of my least favourite directors. If this film being his best is anything to go by. But I do completely understand the allure of the film. It just it's not quite enough to carry it for me, because when I watch it, I'm just thinking well, the vibes are just, they can only take me so far. You know?
No,
so it's a 3 out of 10 from me. But what do you think about Event Horizon? Am I too much of an Event Horizon hater? Is Adam too much of an Event Horizon hater? Let us know in the comments if you like Event Horizon or hate it, or if you kind of see where we're coming from. Hit it with a like. If we're Event Horizon haters, hit it with a dislike. Subscribe to the channel. I know we've missed a few days. As you can probably tell, I'm slightly ill, so we've missed some reviews, but we will do the whole fucking list, which is in the description. Check out what films we're going to be reviewing for Hooptober. We've got more of them coming, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.